just thought I'd make a quick video articulating my immediate reflections on the life of and legacy of Pope Francis following his very sad recent passing. Both as a practicing Catholic and a student of theology, I was very saddened to hear about the death of Pope Francis at the age of 80. While I realise for many Pope Francis was a controversial figure, for me he is the Pope I came to theological maturity under, and whose writings have shaped my own work as a theologian and my personal faith. Indeed, in his paper writings such as Evangelii Gaudium or The Joy of the Gospel, he calls for the Church to be open to the world and to dialogue with it while still being deeply rooted in the Catholic tradition, being tethered while still being willing to reach out to those of all faiths and none. In this way, as many scholars have argued, Pope Francis put forward a joyful orthodoxy, at once deeply respectful of the Catholic tradition, but willing to dialogue with and encounter other points of view. He called for an open church, deeply immersed in the communities it serves, rather than one concerned with procedures of its own preservation. In his other writings, such as Laudato Si, he brought the vast tradition of Catholic social teaching into dialogue with the problems of climate change, to great success and acclaim, it has to be said. In his other writing, which I'll mention here, Fratelli Tutti, he talked about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, polarization and radicalization, and the ways in which the Catholic tradition needed to respond with love and give people a new hopeful perspective on these issues grounded in the gospel and social teaching of the Catholic Church. So in many ways, Francis continued the work of Vatican II, engaging with our contemporary world and bringing the vast, rich and beautiful Catholic tradition into dialogue with it. In his book published in 2020, Let Us Dream Together, he talked about the isolated conscience and how today people are consumed by their own perspectives and ideological attitudes and unwilling to dialogue with others or have their opinions challenged. He links this to the idea popularized by St. Augustine of the soul curved in on itself by sin, that's unable to see another perspective. He also linked this to St. Ignatius's concept of causatus quidditer, which is maybe a fancy word in Latin for the things that block us from God. So he was very conscious of the fact that our modern challenges had solutions within the Christian tradition, brought them to bear as one solution to our current challenges of polarization and division and political fragmentation. So he brought the Christian tradition into dialogue with our contemporary challenges in a beautiful way. He also revitalized Christian-Muslim relations in a post-9/11, post-war on terror world, meeting with Grand Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq and the chief imam of Al-Azhar University, signing a joint declaration with him. Again, he revived relations by promoting a culture of dialoguing and encounter that remained open to the other while deeply rooted in one's own position, in his case, the Catholic tradition. So the Catholic tradition in dialogue, in many ways, he embodied, for good or ill, the perspective of Vatican II in that sense, and more importantly, the Jesuit perspective of compassionate listening and dialogue, of which he was a very keen practitioner. And I think that's what people miss about his theology. It's very grounded in his formation as a Jesuit in Argentina, and it's very grounded in the Jesuit tradition. So he brought Jesuit spirituality to the papacy in a wonderful way, because St. Ignatius emphasized the need to truly understand the perspective of the other and not jump to conclusions, and be compassionate and try and understand the other's perspective rather than condemning them. Jesuit spirituality also places a big emphasis on discernment and figuring out what the Spirit wants us to do and God is asking us to do. Francis tried to bring this dimension to the church with his synodal initiative in many ways, trying to concretize the more participatory Vatican II and revive the conciliar perspective of both the early church period and the church of the 13th century. However, while these seeds have been planted by Francis, in my view, we won't see their full fruit for many years to come. As Francis himself said, synodality is for the church of the third millennium and will take many years to bear fruit. And that for me kind of sums up Francis' legacy. I think it will take many years for his theological wisdom and insight to be appreciated by scholars and the faithful alike, because like his predecessor, Pope Benedict, there's been a lot of nuance lost in the way Pope Francis's pontificate has been reported by the media and understood by many faithful Catholics. So it will take time for those controversies to die down. The profound and fresh insight, orthodoxy of his writings to be appreciated, the ways in which he used the rich and vibrant Catholic tradition to speak to our contemporary world, and I think his writings will be valued for many years to come. And I lament his passing, and I hope he finds peace and rest, having served the Universal Church so well since 2013. So those are my thoughts. Sorry they were a bit incoherent. I'll definitely at some stage do a longer video on the life and legacy of Pope Francis, but that will take some reading and some time to put together. So for now, I hope you found this interesting. My advice, if you want to honor or remember Pope Francis, just go online and read some of his encyclicals, whether it's Evangelii Gaudium, whether it's Fratelli Tutti, whether it's with ROC, because they're a treasure trove of insight and good reflections on how to be Catholic and live the faith in our modern age. Or you could put a little aside for charity or volunteer, because as he always said, he preferred a church that was out on the streets helping people and taking on the smell of the sheep rather than a church that was concerned with its own preservation. And just on this day, try and be reflective, kind to people, for as the gospel says, love your neighbour as yourself, and try and reach out to a friend or a relative or a neighbour and try and dialogue with those you disagree with, because that's something that Francis and the church under Francis was brilliant with, respecting the dignity of those they were in conversation with. That's really the contemporary legacy of Francis. In an age of division, the narcissistic monologue, here was a pope and the church who emphasized instead dialogue, the dignity of all people who sought peace, not violence, in the world. And that's really Pope Francis's theological strength, in that as a pope, he was willing to dialogue with the world and bring the rich Catholic tradition into dialogue with our contemporary challenges. And he will be sorely missed by many, and particularly by me, who has been so shaped by his theological legacy. Thanks for listening.